Before the wife of Bath can begin her tale, she is interrupted somewhat at the end of her prologue, as she is winding up. She says, "I pray to God who sits in majesty to bless his soul with all his mercy dear." Talking about, never mind, former her old husband. "Now I will tell my tale if you will hear." So she's clearly, now I will tell my tale. She's had this very long prologue, and she is now ready to commence. So, of course, she is interrupted. And she is interrupted by the friar, who breaks in. "Madam, this is a long preamble to a tale." And he starts making fun of her. And then the summoner breaks in and and slams down on the what was it, the friar. Another example of quieting, of one-upping, of the guys getting involved in a kind of verbal pissing contest here and there. And he, this, the friar, the summoner slams him. The friar slams him back, and the friar says, "Now by my faith I shall, before I go, tell a tale of a summoner that all the folks will laugh at in this place." So he's saying, "Yeah, well, I'm going to tell a story about how bad you people are." And then the summoner comes right back at him, says, "Now, elsewhere, friar, I do curse your face, unless, and I curse myself too, unless I tell some tales, at least a few, of friars." Say, "Now, I'm going to tell stories about how bad friars are." And this is significant for a couple of things. Number one, guys will only listen to women talk for so long before they have to force their way in there and say, "Now I've had enough listening. You got to listen to me now, guys." But also the implicit assumption that stories are weapons. They are fighting one another, saying that, "Well, I'm going to tell a story about how bad you are." "No, I'm going to tell a story about how bad you are." Stories are dangerous. Stories are weapons. Stories are what they will use to exact revenge of some form. The host, always trying to be a little diplomatic and stay in control of everything, says, "Peace now and then at once." And then he said, "Let the woman tell her tale," specifically identifying her as the woman. Does it need to be gendered? I don't know, but it is here. "Do, madam, tell your tale," and all the rest. So he has to leap in and give the microphone of sorts back to the wife of Bath. He needs to exert that power. The spotlight is his to bestow, not inherently hers. Gotta wonder how she feels about that. "Already, sir, as you think best, if I have license of this worthy friar." "Yes, madam," say he, "tell on, I will hear." Again, she knows her diplomatic place here. She has to be subservient to all of these dudes around her. And then she tells a story, and it begins like a old Arthurian lay, an old story of knights and chivalry and all of that. Days of legend and romance. And she couches this, and she makes certain to bury it in the distant past and suggest that maybe there was something that was special and lost about that time. In the olden days of good King Arthur, of whom Britons still speak with great honor, heralding the patriarchy, this whole land was all filled up with fairies. The Queen Elf with her pretty company went dancing when through many a green mead. I think this was an old belief indeed. I speak of many 100 years ago, but now no one sees elves and fairies go. For now all the charity and prayers of limiters and other holy friars who haunt through every land and every stream, as thick as motes floating in a sunbeam, blessing halls and chambers, kitchens, bowers, cities, boroughs, castles, and high towers, all the modern signs of civilization, barns and villages, cowsheds and dairies. This is the reason why there are no fairies. All of this change, all of this civilization, this social development has made this an ugly land, has made this modern world somewhat more coarse. There's no magic left. There's no romance left. This is an inherently very conservative theme. Now, she is just coming out of suddenly getting caught in the middle of a bunch of, well, they were both religious figures, quite frankly, but a bunch of guys, a bunch of men jousting with one another verbally. And now she is suddenly casting like, well, back in the old days, things were better. Curious personality to strike at the very beginning. And she talks about how so it happened that once this good King Arthur, again, heralding the God the King, I remind you that Chaucer worked for the British royal family, once had a lusty knight, a bachelor. Now, knights are supposed to be very hardy, not necessarily lusty. That's probably an overstatement of the tradition, but we're kind of leaving the tradition behind here. Who one day came riding across the river, saw a maiden walking on her own, from which maid then, no matter what she said, by very force he took her maidenhead. He raped her. Saw a girl walking alone along a river, no one around, I'm gonna rape her. Suddenly, hey, that's harsh. And now that word lusty comes back to us and says, okay, this is really not Chrétien de Troyes. This is not, the worthy knight celebrating a ideal of love without sexual consummation of any sort. This is no longer that worship of women as a vessel of divinity. This is rape. But it has consequences. This oppressive violence caused such clamor and such a suit for justice to King Arthur that soon this knight was sentenced to be dead. It wasn't the king who necessarily said, oh, okay, you raped the girl, so you have to die. It was social protest. It was something rising up from presumably the common folk, from presumably people, well, definitely people lower than Arthur, but a clamor was raised, and whoever was doing the clamoring was probably not part of the inherent royal power structure at the time. By the course of law, and soon a suit for justice to King Arthur, that soon this knight was sentenced to be dead by the course of law and should have lost his head by chance that was the law back long ago. Again, so that pushing it, emphasizing how long ago this was, because of course by Chaucer's time, justice is so much better. Except the queen and other ladies also, so long had then prayed to the king for grace, till he had granted his life in that place, and gave him to the queen to do her will, to choose whether she would have him save or kill. So the king, after getting the blowback, the clamor, the king grants it to the queen and her ladies. What happens to this knight? Grants them the power, the authority to dispense justice as they see fit. The queen then thanked the king with all her might. Again, deference to power. Power is here a gift to be bestowed upon the ladies. But still, they made the appeal. They raised the clamor. So where is that power? They had some agency in this, and they claimed some power, and thus change happened. If they didn't raise a clamor, would Arthur have really cared? Would Arthur have gotten involved? Would Arthur certainly have granted the queen and her ladies any sort of authority in this whatsoever? Hard to argue that. And they come up with an ingenious little challenge. And after this, thus spoke she to the knight, the queen. When on a day she saw that it was time, you stand, she said, in this state for your crime, that of your life you've no security. I mean, you're vulnerable to me. I have power over you. I grant your life if you can tell to me what thing it is that women most desire. What do women want? You're gonna die unless you come to this. And they agree that he can go away, he's free to leave, but he needs to return 1 year, one year and a day from that day. And he's free to go wherever he wants to seek out an answer, to research, to interview, to make a grand study of this problem. What do women want? And he goes throughout the countryside and interviews people and talks to people and tries to figure out what do women want. And in the process, he's coming across a remarkably diverse set of opinions. But he could not arrive on any coast where he might find out about the matter two creatures who agreed on it together. Some said that all women best love richness, some said honor, some said jolliness, some said some rich array, and some said lust in bed, and oftentimes to be widowed and wed. Some said that our hearts were most often eased when we could hear both flattered and when we could be both flattered and well pleased. He got quite near the truth, it seems to me. A man can win us best with flattery, solicitude, and busyness. Thus we are captured, both the more and less. And some said that the best of all love we to do what pleases us and to be free. Freedom, again, liberty, the power to decide for yourself, to assert your own identity within a broader culture. Always coming into that. So you're getting this great diversity of opinion out there, a lot of variety of human nature. But the one undercurrent of all of it is that power, that freedom, that liberty to be ourselves, to exercise our own identity. Also down around like line 950, for be we ever so vicious within, we want to be held wise and clean of sin. Another remarkable little couplet right there. Be we ever so vicious within. Within. A sense of interiority there, a sense of the division between the interior and the exterior self. The admission that sometimes what's going on in the inside isn't what it seems like on the outside. The suggestion that you need to pierce through the outside to get to the inside. which leads us to, again, the medieval construction of allegory. You try and put together what you can through what is physically, visibly available to you so that you can intuit what is actually going on underneath, so that you can see God's work within all things. But also, we want to be held wise and clean of sin, which is, I think, just a general social aspiration. We want to seem wise and good of sin. We want our neighbors, our friends, our families, the people around us whom we see every day to think we're basically nice people, to like us. And here you can see Chaucer again as the vintner's son, the guy who just likes to be around people, and he's very open about that. And you can see this where he is putting in the wife of Bath's mouth, who is also obviously very social and outgoing, and likes people, likes to be around them, likes to interact with them in a bunch of different ways, but also they want to be liked. They want to have that social value in their society. And then she goes off on this story. She said, and some say that we find it very sweet to be thought dependable and discreet, and in one purpose steadfastly to dwell and not betray a thing that men us tell. A rake handle isn't worth that story. We women can't keep secrets by God's glory. Interesting. And then she goes off on this long story of King Midas and a secret that he asked his wife to keep. That he had an old story that she is getting from Ovid, the Roman writer. She talks about experience an awful lot, but she quotes an awful lot of classical and Christian writers and authors. So, experience plus an awful lot of learning. She's complicated, she's sometimes contradictory, but who isn't? That's humanity. But she tells this story of Midas and his wife, and he has ears and donkey ears, and he's embarrassed by this, and so he asks his wife to, let's just keep it between you and me. I wear my hair long so nobody can see, but you're my wife, you see, so just keep it to yourself. And the secret apparently just burns in her. She says, but nonetheless, it seemed to her she died because so long she must that secret hide. She died because she had to keep a secret. But well, she goes around, it's stewing inside her. She's stewing inside her. She's, all right, I got to tell somebody. I got to say it. I can't keep it in. And she can't keep it in. So she goes for a walk along the river, and she tells the river about her husband. My husband has long ass ears on his head. Now is my heart all whole. Now it is out. I can no longer keep it without a doubt. She just needed to say the secret out loud. She didn't have to necessarily have anybody hear it. She didn't have to have anybody, give her validation. She wasn't trying to exchange this secret for anything. She wasn't trying to trade in any knowledge. She wasn't trying to be sneaky about it or mean about it. She didn't want him to feel bad. So she found a way to say it out loud, but not have it hurt anyone. Which is sweet on the one hand, but also it's a sense of, remember, this is a celebration of expression. The wife of Bath is all about not suppressing herself, not repressing herself. And here she is telling a story about repression. She's telling a story within her own story, which is the story Chaucer is telling. So again, we're in those those Russian nesting dolls, story within a story within a story, frame tale that we've seen throughout. And that urge to tell, to just not hold something in. That's, again, it's a sense of the interiority, but it's the sense of repression. And this whole story doesn't necessarily fit in with the rest of it. You're going along. It's like, wait a minute, what happened to the night and the whatever? Why are we suddenly talking about this? And we realize that, well, it's a digression, sure, which a digression is, in one hand, just like a wild left turn, but it is also a thought that strikes a storyteller that doesn't get repressed, that just flowers forth because it's just expression, expression, expression. It's digression as expression. And this is a digression about expression. So, of course, it has to burst out. Of course, it can't be contained. It can't be restrained. It cannot be held back because the Wife of Bath is all about not holding back. And in this, we have the knight who comes back after a year of finding all of this, and he's on his way, and he runs into this old woman just outside of the kingdom, and she says, I can get you out of this. I can tell you, but there's always a but. You have to do what I say. She won't tell him ahead of time. She just extracts this promise that you will honor your word to grant me a boon, a promise, if you survive this. You go back, you tell the queen and her ladies this, and if they let you live, you come to me and you have to do what I say. The knight, who has no idea otherwise, says, all right, I'm with you. I'll go along with this. And so he goes to the queen and he says, my liege lady, generally, said he, women desire to have sovereignty as well over their husbands as their loves, and be in mastery, and to be in mastery them above. This is your greatest desire. Though me you kill, do as you like. I am here at your will. So he tells them, okay, what women want is sovereignty, is power, is authority. And he says this while explicitly saying and reminding them, I am in your power. You have total authority over me. You can kill me if you want. That is your power. But it is another case of the man in this granting power of sorts, because he is explicitly saying, I am in your power. He didn't just say, you guys want power. He used his ability to convince, his rhetorical sleight of hand, his argumentative skills, perhaps, to suggest to them that they have power, or remind them that they have power over him. He didn't just come back and say, I know the answer, and so I am free. He demonstrated that power very cleverly. And so he is free. They let him go. Okay, fine. You can live. And he walks out. Yay! Sees the old woman. And she says, congratulations. Good for you. I'm glad you didn't die. You have to marry me. And he is suddenly very outraged. He's, what? No! You're a dirty old hag. I don't want anything to do with you. She is old. She is poor. She is at this point apparently quite unattractive. All the things that it has been suggested that the Wife of Bath is an older woman with no money who is disposable at this point in her life. And she says, no. You promised me. I'm going to hold you to that. And he is just revulsed by this, physically revulsed by it. And it dwells on her physical appearance and just the notion of her being so beneath him Um, there is there is in him an implicit um, command for hierarchy. He is a Arthurian knight. He is used to a stable pecking order in society, and she is well beneath him. So it's just this just isn't done. And between that and the outward appearance of it, the physicality of it that he's just revulsed by, he just can't get on board. And she she puts forth a very significant argument against the kind of society and cultural expectations that he's so clinging to. And he says, "Sir," said she said, I could mend this again if I like before there'd pass away before there'd pass days 3, if you might now behave well towards me. But since you now speak of such gentleness," so she hints first of all that she has some powers. There's a whole lot of witchcraft, you know, signification going on here. She has some powers to suddenly, make things all better. She's just hinting at that. But since you speak now of such gentleness, such gentility, such courtesy, such aristocracy, the courtly tradition, as descends to you down from old richness. So aristocracy is based on your forebears and what they did. So that because of it, you're gentlemen. Such arrogance is just not worth a hen. I love that little hominess at the end. Such arrogance. So, you know, prestigious is just not worth a hen. Homey little domestic reference. Um, See who is most virtuous all their lives in private and public, and most strives to always do what gentle deeds he can. Now take him for the greatest gentleman. And she lays out this argument that being a gentleman, being an aristocrat, a gentleman, as a gentleman, is more about who you are and what you do than what you inherit from your forebears. Your great 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 grandfather was a duke and he was a favorite of the king, and so you get all of his money, all of his stuff. But what's really valuable is the courtesy, the goodness that perhaps led to him getting all that stuff centuries before, but now that can't be handed down. All of the material possessions can be, but that value of gentility doesn't transmit that way. She cites Dante, another, obviously experienced, but also learning. She's remarkably well read. Uh, in pressing this argument, she argues on classical grounds. She talks about great classical authors, late classical authors, medieval authors. She talks. She bases it on some Christianity. She talks about Christ, and she is making this non-aristocratic. She's taking on aristocratic courtly traditions within an Arthurian story, which I think is quite bold. She's going into the belly of the beast to cut her way out of it, because this is the culture that has been handed down to her throughout these centuries, that has been holding or couching the role of women and the role of wives in a very pejorative sense for centuries now. And she goes into that mode of knights in shining armor and all of that to gut it from within. And Again, she's basing her story on a notion of individual worth rather than class worth. As you are a gentleman, you have gentility, you have courtesy if you are courteous, if you are gentle, if you yourself, through inherent capacities of your identity, exhibit those characteristics, then you are that. It has nothing to do with who your grandparents were, who your great grandparents were, how much money you were handed when you were born. This is also Chaucer the commoner among royals. Consider Chaucer's role. Chaucer was the son of a vintner. Chaucer did spend his entire life from very early on. He was apprenticed to the royal household when he was still a teenager, and he spent his entire life feeling that division between nobility and commonality, and probably with a very acute sense of where that slippery line is and who holds the power within that dynamic and what they do with it. Chaucer is couching this as a critique. Now, they're buried under so many levels, but he is suggesting through the words of this old woman that you think you're gentle? You think you're aristocratic? The best? Well, that kind of stuff doesn't really come with, it can't be handed down through the generations. It has to be earned every day through your behavior, through your experience, in the way you deal with people. That inner value is what's important, not the outward accoutrements of gentility. She puts a particular spin on his revulsion at her poverty. Poverty is a hateful good, I guess, a great encouragement to busyness. Today, yeah, sure, pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. Great improver of wisdom and good sense for him who can suffer it with patience. Poverty, though miserable seems its name, is a possession no one else can claim. Poverty often, when a man is low, can make him both his God and himself know. Poverty's an eyeglass, it seems to me, through which it might make his good and true friends see. If you are poor, if you have no money, you can see the world and experience the world in a very specific and truthful way. You don't get confused by someone's outward friendliness to you just because you have a lot of money. So here, she is pointing out that, well, maybe the poor, maybe your poverty makes you stronger. Maybe we should value that rather than the glitz and the glamour of the hoi polloi. Imagine the power of that. That this woman, this old woman, a witch, in this story, being told by this old woman, the wife of Bath, being told by Chaucer, who's putting himself doubly into that female character, but he shares, because here he's singling out poverty and perhaps age as well. He's an old man by the time he's writing this. He's writing these in the last 15 years of his life, and he's accrued some wealth, but and his family was okay when he was growing up. But he has seen poverty. He has done an awful lot of traveling around Europe, so he has seen it on many different levels in many different countries. And just as a merchant, as a vintner, when he was a boy, he would have had occasion to deal with very ordinary people, shipmen, ordinary voices, common folk, workers, impoverished workers. And he is pulling their voices into this work. And he's weaving their perspectives into his tapestry so that that is part of the representation. Because in this whole parade that he has of the tales and the tellers of the tales, all of these pilgrims are united in a mission to move through and essentially get to God, but they're also pulling together in a certain way. They are operating as a unit and trying to find and negotiate how their democratic unit will function. And he's making sure, Chaucer is making sure that the voices of the poor, the voices of the common workers, aren't necessarily squeezed out. Of course, the woman is a witch. The knight, after this great display, and perhaps the hint that this woman is a witch, ponders and sighs sorely too. Well, okay. She tells him to choose. Do you want me or do you not? What do you want to do? And he now ponders and sighs sorely too, but finally he said in this way here, my lady and my love and wife so dear, I put myself in your wise governing. Choose yourself which one may be most pleasing and most honor both you and me too. I do not care now which one of the two. What pleases you suffices now for me. So he grants her the power. It's him granting her the power, but he is doing that. There is a negotiation. There is like the wife of Bath and her fifth husband. They strip away the expectations of class and culture and society at large, and they just say, okay, how can we get along as individuals? Let's strike an agreement between us based on ourselves. Put everything else out. We don't care. Let's just, you and me, how are we going to make this work? What are we going to do? We need to come to an agreement, and they do. Of course, they kiss, they make up, they're going to stay together, and she turns young and beautiful again. Witches. And that's your happily ever after, which is a very tacked on, very self-consciously phony ending at the end that makes everybody go, aww, and keeps it within the happy fairy tale-like frame that this is working within. But it's still unsatisfying, and deliberately so, because it feels so false. And the problems haven't been resolved, they've just been sort of effaced. They do come to that agreement. There is that moment of power sharing, of dealing with one another, of honesty, and that is admirable. And it just sort of gets in the end a little bit phony because they strike up this thing with her being beautiful suddenly. And all right, fine. You got to have a happy ending while you roll the credits. I'll buy that. But the wife of Bath ends, and thus they both lived until their lives ends in perfect joy, happily ever after. And Jesus Christ ascend, husbands meek and young and fresh in bed, and the grace to outlive those whom we wed. I pray that Jesus may shorten the lives of those who won't be governed by their wives, which is, that's a great line. And old and stingy niggards who won't spend, to them may God a pestilence still end, or soon end. That's the end of it. Ends on pestilence, of course. That's been haunting in the background this entire time. But that spirit of the wife of Bath, that rebellion of her, that strength of character that says, yeah, kill them all. Husbands are great for a little while, but then have them die, and then, we can get on with our lives from there. It's funny. It's shocking. It's supposed to be. And it is a great, great character. And it's a voice that the Canterbury Tales desperately needed, to be honest, because there are a whole lot of guys in this story. And the nuns are women, but the wife of Bath is unique.